Well, slightly awkward camera frame this time, but I have to make use of the limited space I have here, and I need to be able to show the posture properly. So it'll have to do. Anyway, so I want to talk about guards in sword fighting this time, because it seems there are some misconceptions about it. Going by some of the comments on a few of the sparring videos, it seems that people think certain guards are useless, or that there's only one particular guard that really makes sense and that others are too exposed and whatnot. Like that it even seems that some think you have to cover your entire body the entire time, which unfortunately isn't possible. I mean, if you have a shield, then yes, that's a different story. But if you just have a one-handed sword or a two-handed sword, then it's simply not possible. Every guard has its openings, and I mean, that's how you fight. If there were no openings on either of the two combatants, then they couldn't do anything. And I think what many people find the most confusing is this guard here. It's called Fool's Guard. Whether it's called that because supposedly only a fool would assume this guard, or because only a fool would not realize what this guard is for, and I think the latter is more likely. Either way, so it seems a little weird to some people, like you're standing there completely open. What are you doing? So there are some good reasons for that. So for one, it's a resting position. You don't have to hold your sword up the entire time, and it will get heavy after a while. So this conserves energy, and also it provokes certain predictable attacks. Like, as you can see, the entire upper body is open, so you can be pretty certain that the incoming attack is going to be a descending cut, either on the right or left. Could also be a thrust. Some attacks are unlikely, like a rising cut, for example, an undercut. It's not very likely against you in this position. So you already pretty much know what's coming, especially if you see your opponent's guard. If your opponent, for example, has this guard here, it's called Wrath, you can tell that it's mostly going to be a cut from this side. I mean, they could deliberately be trying to fool you and go like that from the other side, but it's the most likely, at least. So if you see that, then you know your opponent's cut is most likely going to be this. So in that case, all you got to do is step back, parry, advance, strike. That's the most basic way of responding to it. And you may think that defending yourself from this low position is slow, but it's really not. I mean, you can very quickly, and I'm not even that quick, there are people who are much faster at that. So it's really not that hard to raise it up to guard. If your opponent thrusts at you, and this also works with a rapier, one of the things you can do is deflect the incoming thrust like this, and this is actually going too wide. You don't want to leave yourself that wide open, but you can strike it to the side. And the nice thing about this is that this rotation in the wrist gives you plenty of power. And if you want to, you can also step to the side to get a bit of safety distance between you and them, and then you can thrust, for example. Or you can use the momentum to come in for a cut. Fool's Guard with a two-handed sword, same kind of idea. You can quickly rise up, you can counter cut, you can, against a thrust, you can use what's called absetzen. You can brush it to the side, and then you can counter thrust or counter cut or whatever you need to do, really. So there are plenty of things to do from that guard. Then there is high guard, and I think the ceiling kind of disagrees with that. Pretty obvious what the advantage is. You already have the sword raised. Throwing a cut from here is really easy, and so it's good for offense. The drawback, of course, is your opponent will see that. I mean, they can anticipate what kind of cut it's going to be, although you can use it to your advantage if you want to feint. So you come in, act as though you're going to throw a downward cut, and then you suddenly do something like this. So still has some options, and again, this is pretty open, right? Because chest is open, legs, everything is exposed. Then there's the wrath guard, wrath as in anger. So there are different variations of it. It can also be vom Tag in German, which is a roof guard. So this is essentially the same thing, but this here is a little more powerful. So with this kind of posture, you're set up for a really powerful cut because the hips are turned, everything's cocked back, you're ready to go. So from here, if you step forward and rotate, this is going to be a very, very powerful cut. Again, the opponent can see that coming. So that's, but then again, all guards give you certain information about what the opponent is likely going to do. So that's a general theme. But good thing about that is, again, you can feint, you can do various things from that guard, and everything is retracted, like your arms are behind you. That's a bit of a drawback of this version here because your arms are in front, so they can be sniped. In this case, it's just they're just a little safer. There's quite a large number of other guards. I don't want to go through all of them, but I think the one that people generally consider the safest when they see it is this. This is what's called longsword or long point. So you have the sword directly in front of you. So this looks perfectly safe, right? I'm guarding myself with the sword. The opponent can't get past that. They can't do anything. No, that's not true. There are several things they can do, and this has some disadvantages. For one, I cannot throw a cut from this. Not possible. In order to throw a cut, I have to first raise up into another guard, because from here, this is not a cut at all. This wouldn't do anything. This wouldn't even penetrate clothing. Like even summer clothing. It just doesn't cause a substantial injury. So you would have to do something about that first. Or undercuts. Like I would have to draw it in first and then come in for the undercut. So no cuts from here. The only offense I can do from here is a thrust. That's it. So the other problem is you're presenting your blade to be engaged by the opponent. And if your opponent is really good at binding and winding, then you may not want that. What that means is, if you don't know, binding means you simply make contact with your opponent's blade. From the bind, you get a lot more information about what they're going to do. Because based on where the pressure goes, you can respond to it, you can anticipate what your opponent is going to do. And also, there are things, rapier fencing, some of it applies to this as well, like constrainment, for example. If there's a bind and you turn the edge towards their blade and go in like this with a thrust, you will displace their blade at the same time while you're coming in for a thrust. So there are, if you're good at that, you may not mind. But even if you are, there's one other thing they can do. For example, there's the Krumpau, which is designed, among other things, for exactly that. Your opponent has the blade in front of them. You approach, you knock it to the side, and come in for the cut. And it's really hard to do that with the limited space here, but that's basically what it looks like. So that can be pretty difficult to respond to. I mean, there are some ways. If you see that in time and you just retract your blade, you're fine. But if you don't and they knock it down, then it's really hard to recover from that in time to respond to their attack. It's worth noting that it also depends on the style. For example, in Polish saber fencing, there's this guard here. And this is somewhat similar, but since the point is going up, there's still a bit of rotation here for a cut. Not much, but there's a little bit. And it depends on what kind of setting it is. If we're talking Polish nobles fighting one another, they didn't want to kill each other because then they could be sued, which is not good for them, of course. So in that case, if the rule of the duel is you ended by drawing blood, for example, then in this case, this kind of cut, just kind of going pop and I don't know how well you can see that, but this kind of thing may be enough. If that hits the forehead, you may split the skin open, you draw blood, it's done. So you've won the duel at that point, which is fine. If it's a duel to the death where you're actually trying to cause some real damage, then this is not gonna do it. But you could still throw an elbow cut from that. Of course, that means you leave that guard, so it's the same kind of issue. So from here, this is really the only thing you could do, like a quick wrist cut. The wrist cut is still potentially more powerful than just this, but a wrist cut is still not going to be very damaging. I hate making videos in summer. The video lights here are baking me right now. Anyway, so there are also other guards that all have their pros and cons. Like, for example, if you're on this side, the left is open. If you move it over to the other side, the right side is open. If you move up here, the lower body is exposed. So it's impossible to guard everything. There are certain techniques that defeat certain guards. For example, if your opponent is in plow guard, can be on either side, then the shield how breaks that. So shield is this. If you execute that against somebody who is in plow, you will push their blade aside, you will cut them, and their blade cannot be used at that time. So that strike breaks that guard. If your opponent is in roof guard or wrath guard, it makes sense for you to also be in wrath guard, because the wrath cut actually defeats another wrath cut. So if they come in with a wrath cut and you do a triangle step to the side and cut at the same time, you will push their blade to the side and you will cut to their head. So as you can tell, there are a lot of strategic elements to consider, and in some cases there is a bit of a rock, paper, scissors mechanic going on, where certain cuts and certain guards or parries just are particularly good against one another. It's of course difficult, very difficult, to actually figure that out in a fight, because you don't have that much time to think. That's why you have to practice a lot to develop muscle memory, so you react pretty much automatically without thinking too much. Because if you have to think, okay, so they are throwing this, what was it again? Oh yeah, I should do the dead. So you can't think that long, which makes it pretty hard. And also, it makes it really hard to anticipate what the opponent is doing. For example, if I am in a high guard, my cut, if I advance, could be this, but it could also be that. So that's kind of, I'm sorry, the limited space here is a bit problematic. But so if I just drop it and perform a horizontal cut, this is really hard for you to see which it's going to be. And even if I come in here and then suddenly drop low and cut to the leg, completely different thing, but it still comes from that side. And like I already showed earlier, I can suddenly bring it over to the other side and cut from there. So that all happens in split seconds. So it's pretty difficult that way. But yeah, that's really all I wanted to say about this. There isn't just a single thing that everybody does all the time in every martial art. Because if there was a perfect way to do it, everybody would do it or would have done it. So yeah, I hope this was informative, and thanks for watching.